What if the justice system got it wrong? What if an innocent man was executed and no one ever said sorry? These are the stories they don't want you to hear, true accounts of men who were sentenced to death. Despite missing evidence, recanted testimonies, or shocking misconduct, some were executed. Some were exonerated too late. And some lived to tell the world just how close they came to dying for a crime they didn't commit. Part 2 of our 10 prisoners executed just to later find out they were innocent. These are innocent men, destroyed by one broken system. This is not just a video. This is a warning. A cry for justice. Before we start, subscribe to our channel so that you won't miss jaw-dropping stories that will leave you at the edge of your seat as you watch. Now let's go. Number 6. Troy Davis. Convicted of killing a police officer. Troy Anthony Davis was born in Savannah, Georgia in 1968. And by all accounts, he grew up as a well-liked young man. He was active in church, known in his neighborhood, and came from a hard-working family. But everything changed one August night in 1989. A night that would not only shape the rest of his life, but would also ignite a global debate about the fairness of the American justice system. It was the early morning hours of August 19th, and Savannah police officer Mark McPhail was working a side job as a security guard at a Burger King. A man was being assaulted in the parking lot, pistol-whipped, beaten, and Officer McPhail intervened. But before he could pull his weapon or even fully respond, he was shot multiple times and killed on the scene. The murder shocked the community. Officer McPhail was only 27 years old, a former Army Ranger, and the father of 2 young children. The police launched an urgent manhunt for the killer. It didn't take long before the name Troy Davis came up. Davis had been in the area that night. A witness claimed he had a gun. Another claimed he had confessed. No physical evidence linked him to the murder, no fingerprints, no DNA, no gun ever found. But there were 9 witnesses. That was enough. Davis was arrested, charged, and in 1991, he was convicted of the murder of Officer Mark McPhail and sentenced to death. But then, something remarkable began to happen. Over the years, 7 out of the 9 witnesses recanted or changed their testimony. Some said they had been coerced by police during the investigation. Others admitted they were afraid to speak the truth back then. And one name came up repeatedly as the real killer, Sylvester "Red" Coles, the very man who first pointed the finger at Troy Davis. Coles had a violent history and was seen arguing with the victim before the shooting. Still, despite these recantations and growing public doubt, the state of Georgia pushed forward. Troy Davis spent 22 years on death row. During that time, he maintained his innocence consistently. He wrote letters, granted interviews, and appealed to anyone who would listen. His case caught the attention of human rights groups, lawyers, celebrities, and global leaders. Amnesty International, the NAACP, former FBI Director William Sessions, former President Jimmy Carter, and even Pope Benedict XVI all called for clemency or a new trial. There were massive protests, petitions signed by hundreds of thousands, and global media coverage. Despite the outcry, every appeal failed. In September 2011, a final clemency hearing was held. The Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles heard from Davis's defense team and from the family of Officer McPhail. The board denied clemency. September 21, 2011, Execution Day. Crowds gathered outside the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Georgia. Some prayed, others held candles and signs. Inside the prison, Troy Davis was strapped to the gurney. The time was 10:53 p.m. Just before the lethal injection began, Davis gave his final statement. "I am innocent. The incident that happened that night is not my fault. I did not have a gun. For those about to take my life, may God have mercy on your souls. May God bless your souls." He turned to the McPhail family, who were present to witness the execution, and said, "I did not personally kill your son, father, and brother. I am innocent." Troy Davis was pronounced dead at 11:08 p.m. The world reacted. The New York Times ran editorials questioning the decision. Protests erupted in major cities. Amnesty International released a statement calling the execution a catastrophic failure of justice. But for the state of Georgia, the case was closed. And for the family of Officer McPhail, they believed justice had been served. Yet for millions of others, Troy Davis's death became a symbol of a system that could end a life even in the face of overwhelming doubt. Was he guilty? No court has ever officially cleared his name. But when 7 out of 9 witnesses changed their story, when no physical evidence ties a man to a crime, and when prominent voices across the world plead for mercy, the question remains, should any life be taken under such uncertainty? The story of Troy Davis forces us to confront that uncomfortable truth, that justice, in its pursuit of finality, can sometimes silence the very voices crying out to be heard. And once it does, there's no going back. Number 7. Ruben Cantu, executed at age 17. Later, the key eyewitness recanted, and no physical evidence linked him to the crime. Ruben Cantu was just 17 when he was accused of a murder that would ultimately cost him his life. Raised in San Antonio, Texas, Cantu was a young Latino boy with no prior record of violent crime. On paper, he seemed like the kind of person society often brushes aside, a poor teen in a rough neighborhood. But what would unfold would raise deep questions about justice, racial bias, and how the system sometimes reaches for convenience instead of truth. The crime in question occurred in 1984. Two men were working a late night construction job in an unoccupied house when they were shot during what police claimed was a robbery attempt. One of the men, Pedro Gomez, died. The other, Juan Moreno, survived, barely. He was shot multiple times but managed to recover. Initially, Moreno did not identify Cantu. In fact, he said he couldn't identify the shooter and didn't know who it was. But days later, under pressure from police and despite lingering fear and trauma, Moreno changed his statement. The investigation was questionable from the start. There was no physical evidence linking Ruben Cantu to the crime. No fingerprints, no weapon, no DNA, nothing. Just the testimony of a single eyewitness, the survivor, who, under pressure and likely afraid, pointed the finger at Cantu. Ruben was arrested, tried as an adult, and sentenced to death. At the trial, Cantu maintained his innocence. He said he had nothing to do with the shooting and had been at home the night it occurred. His co-defendant, David Garza, also claimed Ruben wasn't involved. But none of that mattered. Ruben was convicted, largely on Moreno's shaky identification, and sent to death row. Years later, Juan Moreno would admit what many had feared. He had lied. In 1996, long after Cantu's execution, Moreno gave an interview saying, "It was a case of being pressured. The police were certain it was him, and they kind of pushed me to agree." He said he had felt guilt ever since and tried to suppress it, but it never left him. The story haunted him. "I was wrong," he confessed. Ruben Cantu was innocent. To make matters worse, David Garza, who had taken a plea deal, also said Ruben wasn't involved. According to Garza, the police had rushed to judgment, and they needed someone to take the fall. Ruben, young and defenseless, fit the bill. By the time the full truth started surfacing, it was too late. Ruben Cantu was executed by lethal injection on August 24, 1993. He was only 26 years old. His final meal was a cheeseburger, French fries, and iced tea. According to the prison log, he had been calm in the hours before his execution. But those who met him said there was a quiet heaviness in his voice, as though he carried the weight of knowing he would die for something he didn't do. His final words were simple but powerful. "I am innocent, and I bear no malice, I'm ready." Those words now echo louder than ever. In the years following his execution, Ruben's case became one of the most cited examples of a wrongful death sentence. Advocacy groups, journalists, and even some legal officials began questioning the process that had led to his death. In 2005, the Houston Chronicle ran an investigative report that brought the case back into the national spotlight. It asked hard questions. How could a child be put to death with so little evidence? Why wasn't more done to verify the claims? And perhaps most haunting of all, what if he had been given just a little more time? The tragedy of Ruben Cantu isn't just that he died. It's that he died knowing the truth, and no one listened. His case serves as a painful reminder that the death penalty is final and irreversible. That mistakes in the system don't just cost time, they can cost lives. And in Ruben's case, they did. Number 8. David Spence. Convicted of killing 3 teenagers. David Wayne Spence was executed by the state of Texas on April 3, 1997, for a crime that many believe he did not commit. His case is one of the most disturbing examples of how flimsy evidence and desperation for justice can result in the death of the wrong man. In 1982, 3 teenagers, Jill Montgomery, Raylene Rice, and Kenneth Franks, were found murdered near Lake Waco in Texas. The 2 girls had been raped and stabbed. The boy was stabbed multiple times. The case was horrifying, and the community cried out for justice. But police had little to go on, and months passed without arrests. That's when the focus turned to David Spence. David was a troubled young man with a criminal record, but no history of violence anywhere near the scale of this crime. What tied him to the murders? A jailhouse informant claimed Spence confessed behind bars. Then came the bite mark evidence. 2 forensic dentists said the marks on the victims matched Spence's teeth. That was it, the smoking gun, they claimed. But years later, the truth began to unravel. Several experts reviewed the case and concluded the bite mark analysis was deeply flawed. In fact, 2 nationally recognized forensic odontologists said the marks were not human bites at all. The jailhouse informant also changed his story multiple times and later admitted he was offered leniency in exchange for his testimony. Still, the courts upheld Spence's conviction, and he remained on death row for over a decade. Spence always maintained his innocence. In fact, the man who many believe was the real killer, Anthony Melendez, confessed to participating in the murders with his brother and 2 other men, and he repeatedly said Spence had nothing to do with it. Melendez even said they had originally planned to kill someone else entirely, but mistook the victims for the intended target. In the days leading up to his execution, Spence continued to say he was innocent. "I didn't do it," he told reporters. "I'm not angry at the system, but I do believe it's made a mistake." He spent his final day in prayer and conversation with his spiritual advisor. His last meal was a cheeseburger, French fries, and a Dr. Pepper. Simple, quiet choices for a man facing the most irreversible judgment of all. On April 3, 1997, David Spence was led to the execution chamber in Huntsville, Texas. As he lay on the gurney, strapped down and moments away from death, he spoke his final words clearly. "I want the victims' families to know I didn't kill your kids. I didn't kill anyone. I'm sorry for your pain, but I'm not the one who caused it." The drugs began to flow, and within minutes, he was dead. Years after his execution, former Waco police and investigators, including the very prosecutor who convicted him, began expressing doubts. The case that once seemed airtight now appeared built on shaky ground. Flawed forensic science, unreliable witnesses, and intense pressure to find someone, anyone to blame. David Spence may not have been a saint, but many believe he was not a killer either. His story remains a chilling reminder that the death penalty carries a finality that justice systems, being human, are not always equipped to handle. Number 9. Klinton Lee, executed despite later DNA evidence pointing to someone else. Klinton Lee Rushing was executed by the state of Arkansas in 1997 for the brutal rape and murder of 22-year-old Wendy Allen, a college student found dead in her Little Rock apartment in 1993. Her death shocked the community, and within weeks, police had zeroed in on Rushing, a 24-year-old man with a prior burglary conviction and a troubled past. The evidence was thin, but the desire to close the case was overwhelming. From the beginning, Klinton Lee maintained his innocence. He had no alibi for the night of the murder, but no physical evidence tied him directly to the crime scene. No fingerprints, no DNA. What sealed his fate was a confession, one he said was coerced. Rushing claimed he was interrogated for over 16 hours, denied food and water, and threatened with the death penalty if he didn't cooperate. In the end, he signed a statement admitting to being present during the murder, though it was riddled with inconsistencies. He later recanted. The jury, shown a signed confession and encouraged by the prosecution's emotional appeal, took just a few hours to convict him. He was sentenced to death. But the story didn't end there. In 1996, just months before his scheduled execution, DNA evidence recovered from the crime scene, specifically semen found on the victim, was finally tested using improved technology. It did not match Klinton Lee. Instead, it matched an unidentified male. Even more shocking, that profile matched DNA in 2 other unsolved assaults in Arkansas. There was clearly someone else, someone still free. Klinton's lawyers filed for a stay of execution. National media picked up the case. Civil rights groups and human rights organizations begged the governor for clemency. Even some members of the original jury said they would have ruled differently if the DNA had been available during trial. But the courts argued that because Rushing had confessed, the conviction stood, and the DNA did not conclusively prove his innocence. On the evening of his execution, Klinton Lee spent time reading his Bible and speaking with his sister and attorney. His last meal was fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a slice of pecan pie, a Southern comfort meal chosen deliberately to remind him of home. as he was strapped to the gurney and the 4 lines were inserted. He looked up through the glass at the small crowd of witnesses and said quietly, "You are killing an innocent man tonight. But God knows the truth, and so will the world one day. I forgive those who failed me. I pray you find peace." The lethal drugs began to flow. Klinton Lee was declared dead at 9:12 p.m. In the years following his execution, his case has been cited in legal textbooks, law school debates, and documentaries about wrongful convictions. In 2005, the state of Arkansas has quietly reopened the investigation into the Wendy Allen case, acknowledging that new evidence may have pointed to another suspect. But for Klinton Lee Rushing, the justice system had already run its course permanently. His story continues to be one of the most haunting examples of what happens when flawed forensic science, a rushed investigation, and a broken appeals process collide. On number 10, we have Anthony Graves. Although not executed, Graves spent 12 years on death row before being exonerated. Prosecutors later admitted evidence had been concealed. His case is often cited alongside wrongful executions in Texas. If you have watched up till this moment, please subscribe to our channel for more crime documentaries. Back to the story. On a quiet night in August 1992 in the small town of Somerville, Texas, a brutal crime rocked the rural community. An entire family was murdered. 6 people, Bobby Davis, her daughter, and 4 grandchildren were bludgeoned, stabbed, and shot to death before the house was set on fire. The youngest victim was just 4 years old. It was the kind of horror story that spread fear like wildfire. The small-town sheriff's office was under enormous pressure to find the killer and fast. Just a few hours after the murders, law enforcement arrested Robert Carter, a man with visible burns on his body and inconsistencies in his story. Carter, who was the father of one of the children killed, was quickly named a suspect. But rather than accept sole responsibility, he pointed the finger at Anthony Graves, a 26-year-old black man with no criminal record and no known connection to the crime scene. Carter later admitted that he implicated Graves to protect his wife, who he feared might also be charged if he confessed alone. But once Graves' name was out there, investigators fixated on him. There was no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitnesses. Still, he was arrested and charged with capital murder. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on Carter's testimony, given under pressure and in exchange for leniency. During the trial, the jury was never told that Carter had repeatedly recanted his statement implicating Graves, even stating just before his own execution that Anthony Graves was innocent and had nothing to do with the crime, but it was too late. In 1994, Graves was convicted and sentenced to death. From the beginning, there were glaring holes in the case. No physical evidence placed Graves at the scene. No motive was ever established. Several alibi witnesses testified that Graves was at home at the time of the murders.